Welcome everyone to this Froebel Trust special spring webinar. And I say special because today is the 240th anniversary of Froebel's birthday, 21st of April, 1782. It seems very appropriate that today also saw the release in England of the Department for Education's new strategy on sustainability and climate change for education and children's services. And tonight, my job is simply to introduce you to our wonderful chair for this event, who's eminently qualified. He is Shaddai Tembo, who's studying for a PhD in the context, studying for a PhD about gender and race normativities in the context of outdoor nurseries. But Shaddai is also someone who was recently awarded a Froebel Trust research grant to work in partnership with Simon Bateson from Edinburgh University on a very exciting and important project that will examine how Froebelian pedagogy responds to social justice priorities, such as racial inequalities, in the 21st century. And Shaddai and Simon are aiming to support and mobilise anti-racist practice in early childhood education. So we're really excited that they're starting this research, and I'm really delighted that Shaddai has agreed to chair this evening's events. And I'm going to hand over to you now, Shaddai. Hello, and thank you for agreeing to chair for us this evening.
Thank you for that, Sasha. It's lovely to be here, and welcome along everyone to this session on childhood and nature. Outdoor play, as Sasha said, is a real focus of mine and a real interest as it's been over the past 2 years. So I'm really excited to see what the speakers have got to say today, and looking forward to perhaps a lively Q&A towards the end as well. So let's get into it. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Konnie Huq, who I'm sure needs very little introduction. Konnie Huq was Blue Peter's longest serving female presenter between 1997 and 2008. And since then, she's become a best-selling children's author with Piccadilly Press. The two main characters of her cookie books, the main character of her cookie book is inspired by Connie's own London Bangladeshi background and her love of science. Konnie also co-wrote the second instalment of the critically acclaimed Channel 4 series Black Mirror. Most recently, Konnie has been actively campaigning for better education about the environment for children. She is currently an ambassador for the Prince's Trust, British Asian Trust, Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, and the climate change campaign for the group Mothers Rise Up. Here, Konnie will be making a case for better education about the environment for children. So, Konnie, welcome along, and the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Shaddai. And can I just begin by saying a huge happy birthday to the Froebel Trust. I'm really honoured to be here this evening because Froebelians share lots of my values. We have so many values in common: inclusivity, diversity, caring for nature and our environment. And so, more than perhaps other engagements that I've done, this one is really close to my heart. Shaddai gave me a lovely introduction there, but for those of you that don't know, and I've noticed there's people from as far away as Wales to Istanbul, Penzance to Perthshire, lots of you out there. Hello everyone. I'll give you another little brief introduction of why I'm here and who I am, essentially. So I started presenting Blue Peter many moons ago. I always feel incredibly old when people come up to me and tell me, I grew up with you. And I think, oh no, I thought I was the same age as you. And then I realized it's actually over a decade ago that I finished presenting on Blue Peter. And as Shaddai also mentioned, I'm now a children's book author. But previous to that, my dissertation at university was all to do with young people and consumerism, and post that I do a lot of outreach for children from minority backgrounds, from disadvantaged societies, and a lot of what I do is about nature and inclusivity and diversity. Now, as many of you that are watching will know, people that work with children, we all have something in common, I like to think, in that we are caring and compassionate, and we have empathy. And empathy is a big buzzword for me, because I believe that empathy can fix all of the world's problems. And we're talking poverty, inequality is increasing and increasing at a gross rate. And I'm talking climate change as well, and then prejudice. And we are getting better at addressing these things, but it's not quite good enough. Having worked in children's television for many, many years, and then worked in grown-up TV too, one thing that really struck me is the people that work with children, they're naturally nicer people, because let's face it, the remuneration is a lot less than in the adult sector, and the same I can say for books and publishing as well. But the rewards are so great, because as we all know, people professions and caring professions give you so much fulfillment. But it's kind of ironic what I'm saying about how the remuneration, the adulation and the rewards seem to be so much less for the children's sector when you compare it to sort of its adult counterparts, because actually it's so much more important. Because I'm going to use that age-old cliche, but children are the future, and they can fix all the ills of tomorrow. And it's a big responsibility and a big burden to put upon them. But as I'm always saying, us cynical and jaded adults, our brains are so wired and preset already. You know, the amount of times, just to give an example, and hopefully my husband's not listening in, you know, that I've had to sort of say to him, you know, don't use a carrier bag, you know, a bag for life is important. And if you have a carrier bag, use it again and again and again. And I've caught him so many times just flinging a carrier bag into the dustbin. And I'm talking the normal dustbin, not even the recycling bin. Touch wood, I've got a wooden table down here. This hasn't happened in more recent years, but it used to happen multiple times. And the reason is that when adults have had a lifetime of being conditioned in a certain way, it's really, really hard to undo that. Anybody that works in sort of PR will tell you, anyone that's had a lifetime of buying, I don't know, one brand of toothpaste or something, it's very, very hard to get them to switch. Whereas children are essentially a blank canvas. They're born with nothing painted in. And all the things that are painted upon that canvas are things that we put upon them. It's all to do with environment, nurturing, parenting, and teaching. So we have a big responsibility on our hands. I'm always saying that in your primary years, essentially, you're shaping and forming. By secondary school, you're pretty much done, believe it or not. Even though you're still pretty young when you enter secondary school, by your 20s, you're so fixed and the blueprint is so set that by your 30s, you need lots of therapy to undo it all. Well, either therapy or copious amounts of alcohol, but that's how quickly it all happens. And you kind of only realize that when you become a grown-up, and then you realize that all the things that you do, that little foible you have, those mannerisms, the way you think about certain aspects, the way you behave in certain scenarios, they're all things that came to us in those early years. Perhaps, you know, that tick of yours has come through your mother, or perhaps it was your teacher telling you that this is the way to do X, Y, Z, and that's just sunk in. Anything that essentially strikes you to your core as a primary school child, you take with you for life. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. So on Blue Peter, obviously I spent a lot of time interviewing different people from different walks of life, different professions, and often these people might have been the top of their field, whether you're talking, I don't know, sports people, artists, authors, all sorts of people from all different professions. And one thing that really sort of struck me and stayed with me is the people that are really passionate about what they do, and often quite high up in their fields. Their passions often started really, really young. And I'm going to sort of give you a few illustrations of that. The first one is pretty extreme. So I interviewed a guy who had designed the Queen Mary 2 cruise liner. Now, this is the biggest ship of its kind. It's absolutely gargantuan. And to put it into perspective, on board, it has 5 swimming pools, including a thalassotherapy pool. I hadn't even heard of a thalassotherapy pool before interviewing him, but apparently it's just like a giant jacuzzi, a pool essentially with lots of sort of jets and tubes and splashing water everywhere. It has a planetarium, it has an auditorium, a ballroom. So just think Titanic, but without the sinking. And I said to him, what made you, come to be doing this? How did you get to where you are today? And he said that when he was really young, he learned of the sinking of the Queen Mary 1. And the QM1 was the biggest cruise liner of its time back then. And he said he was so affected by the fact that this ship sunk that as a small child, he decided then and there that he would grow up to design the QM2, which he did. And like I said, this is a pretty extreme example, but there were many others as well. I did Strictly Come Dancing for children in need, and essentially the dancer Kevin Clifton reminded me that he and his sister had been on the show, and this is how old I am. I was presenting it at that time too, as junior ballroom dancers. And then other people such as Lewis Hamilton was a go-kart racer, but it's not just sort of famous people, all sorts of people and from all sorts of professions. Lots of you might have seen an audience with Adele recently, where her music teacher came and surprised her. But it just takes something that strikes you to your core in those early years, and it can often be a teacher or a primary carer that can be a real game changer. A child just needs even just one person to believe in them and value them, and show them that they can, and really sort of fight their corner. And that can be a complete game changer. It can completely change a child's trajectory and where they go in life. So the work that you guys will do is so massively important, and sometimes you might not actually get to see the long-term benefits of what you do, but game changer is certainly two words that come to mind. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and how I came to be sort of a climate change eco-warrior ambassador type person. My parents came over to the UK in the 1960s, and they both grew up in a village in Bangladesh. And I actually went back filming there on Blue Peter, and I had been back there once before previously. But for those of you that don't know, Bangladesh is a really densely populated country, and it's full of poverty. It's a tiny country with loads and loads of people, and when climate destruction happens, it's low-lying as well. So when flooding comes, it will be one of the first places affected. My parents moved over to the UK to give me a better start in life, because they knew how important it was for a child to be brought up with sort of a good education, good values, and a good environment. And growing up, I always used to feel like I grew up in leafy West London, which was quite a white neighbourhood, and I always grew up feeling a little bit other, a little bit like a minority. I can remember sort of thinking, oh, why do my parents wear saris and eat with their hands and all this kind of thing? And actually, as children, you often can sort of rebel against your parents, and you think you know best as a child, and so on and so forth. And my mum would say stuff like, finish everything that's on your plate, and otherwise it's disrespectful, and there are children that are starving far away, and all this kind of stuff. And I used to just think, why do we have to take sandwiches when we go out? Why can't we eat out? And all this kind of thing. But as you learn when you grow up, you often rebel in between. So in my youth, I tried to go against the norm, and I tried to sort of not do what my parents wanted me to do. But then you grow older and you revert to those values, those things that struck you to your core. So now I catch myself telling my children, put less on your plate and you can take more later, but you're not scraping any off in the bin, all that kind of stuff. It was sort of put into my DNA, I feel, growing up, that being wasteful is just totally irresponsible. And having seen, and I didn't just go back to Bangladesh during my Blue Peter years, but I did a lot of filming for Comic Relief. I did work with the Red Cross in Angola, where they've had civil war, and seeing how important it is to value anything, any little thing, actually makes you happier. And there's so many sort of Frobelian ideals which I totally sort of believe in and adhere to. But one of the things that really strikes true to me is I have this mantra of keeping your standards low. And essentially all that means is that we live in such a progressive society that we set ourselves all these immense goals, and then we just beat ourselves up when we can't reach those targets. And we're so competitive. And it's because we live in this consumerist society where sort of you're taught that your happiness comes to sort of having more, essentially. And that's very subtly done through the media and through all the stuff around us. But that's not sustainable with a dying planet, because every product we buy, every decision we make, more or less, unless it's truly just sort of romping around in nature. I'm sorry if you can hear my children in the background screaming. I'm not sure whether you can, but if so, apologies on their behalf. But everything has a carbon footprint, essentially. And, you know, even if you're not using plastic, even if, you know, for instance, I've got a wooden ruler here, and this ruler is from the 1960s. It's got the old W.H. Smith logo on it. You know, I'm always telling my kids, value things, use them for a long time. But even things made out of natural substances, they've been produced in a factory, they'll have been transported. The factory probably uses fossil fuels. You might go in a car to the shop to buy them. You know, all of that stuff, all of those processes have carbon footprint. So going back to the fact of sort of having less, and my parents and growing up and valuing things, the less we can have in life, the better from a carbon footprint perspective. And so if we can instill that mentality in our young children, which is kind of quite difficult to do in this consumerist society, then the future is very, very bright indeed. Because basically they are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, essentially. And if every child has values of empathy and altruism, then that will fix all the world's problems tomorrow. That means that if they are the head of a FTSE 100 company, they'll want to make workers pay better and not just increase fat cat salaries, which helps increase inequality. Because I grew up in a time when billionaires didn't even exist, and multimillionaires were really, really rare, and millionaires were like, wow. And now it seems like trillionaires are going to be a common thing. And you can always get richer and richer, but you can never have less than nothing. So the spectrum will always be growing at the top end, and that means inequality will only be getting more and more and more. And as that top end has more and more money, then also sort of consumerism gets worse and worse and worse, because they need to spend it on bigger things and more and reinvest more money and so on and so forth. So we need to make sure that our children are instilled with these values of being happy with what they have. And, you know, Froebelian thought actually, you know, looks at things like, you know, the beauty of a child being able to splash about in a puddle for ages, and, you know, see the fun and the beauty in romping around in the greenery. And, you know, that is oxygen giving greenery that gives you your dopamine hits, which are much better than the dopamine hit from buying, I don't know, the iPhone 1000, because you get the iPhone 1000 and you're happy for all of 2 minutes, and then the 2000 comes out, the 3000, the 4000, and so you're continually chasing this thing, and you'll never be at the top. You'll never be the richest, you'll never be the best looking, you'll never be the most powerful, and even if you are, there's only one place to go, which is down. And it's like a drug. So those hits and those highs come with associated lows, and if you've had it all and you drop, it's even worse. So it's really, really important to make sure that children are really grounded, because it's all too easy in this sort of world of, I don't know, Uber and Deliveroo and iPads and tap and touch and QR codes and click and collect, to sort of change our mentality accordingly and just think of it as the norm and to take it for granted. You know, I grew up in a time when there were only 3 channels on the TV. I thought, how much more modern can society get than this? This is amazing, you know. And then a 4th channel came along, and now we have like a gazillion channels, and we have things like iPads, and you can swipe screens and all sorts of things. But for millions of years, humans essentially were just hunter-gatherers, and not much happened. And we just lived quite happily like that. And then we had settlements, which meant we could farm food. And then we learned how to, for instance, convert energy, which means we could harness steam and travel with the railways. And then, for instance, science and tech came along, you know, medicines that could cure us. And then at the extreme level, you know, the amazing technology that we have today, we can go to space, we can do whatever. The rate of change is such that every new progress leads to 10 more, which leads to 10 more. So whereas we were hunter-gatherers for millions of years, suddenly the rate of change is going like that. And it's not sustainable with the dying planet. We need to sort of change our barometer, essentially. And in Sweden, they have this thing called lagom. And lagom is just the right amount. And it became incredibly fashionable to have just the right amount of stuff, which means that you don't need to have 1 million handbags. You know, you can have 2, and people would revere you for having 2 and be disgusted at you having 1 million. So it's flip reversing that mentality of like, oh, wow, you've got so much clothes, and being impressed by that, being impressed by people having a social conscience. And, you know, I went round to a friend's house. This is, I was going to say the other day, it's actually pre-COVID. Now, I don't buy clothes because I have enough clothes. I haven't bought clothes for years, and I'm lucky that I worked in a profession where you get lots of clothes, essentially. But I'm not growing. I don't buy clothes. And I have a friend who's the same as me now, same mentality, quite anti-consumerism. We buy food, we buy what we need, but that's it. And that we derive our happiness from that. And it's all to do with what you derive your happiness from. And we can have kids and young people today who are much more climate conscious are already getting there, that derive their happiness from not being wasteful. But anyway, we went round to another friend's house, and she said to my first friend, I love your top. And my first friend said, oh, this is however many years old, 5 years old or whatever, from blah, blah, blah. And then I said, oh, I can trump that. This is 10 years old from blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the point being, I said to them, there is a world in which people will try and trump each other with what they don't have, rather than what they have. And actually, you could have a Sunday Times give back list rather than a Sunday Times rich list, because all these people are just egos and they want the adulation. And maybe they could get the adulation from, instead of having the millions and millions to spend on themselves, how much they're going to give back. It's all about changing mentalities, and that starts with the children. And we as educators have that on our plate and on our conscience. So I'm just going to quickly, very quickly, because I know that I'm whizzing out of time, just tell you that, you know, a lot of grown-ups I speak to, they don't quite grasp the whole thing of like how the ice caps melting is related to using less plastic, is related to eating less meat, and so on and so forth. So if there's ever a time when you need to explain to children, it's a really simple thing just to show them is, for millions of years, plants and humans and animals lived in a perfect balance of gas exchange. So we breathe in oxygen, which is given out by plants, which also feed us. And then we breathe out carbon dioxide, which the plants use to photosynthesize and grow. And for millions of years, we had the right amount of oxygen and we had the right amount of carbon dioxide, the perfect balance. Then us humans started to take natural resources out of our earth. So natural oil could be made into, say, plastics and other materials with hydrocarbon chains, or petrol, synthetic stuff. And that meant that suddenly carbon was released from the earth. So we spoiled that balance. And whereas something wooden, you bury it in the ground and it rots, something natural can rot away, your metal can rust away, plastic is really hard to dispose of. If you burn it, carbon gas is in our atmosphere, which increases global warming, which is no good. And that's why the polar ice caps are going to melt. And so what the 4 things kids can do, and everyone could do, is look after our oceans, because that provides over 50% of our oxygen. So eating sustainable fish, because plant and animal life and biodiversity, it's all interdependent. Making sure that we don't use plastic, because loads of our plastic ends up in the sea, and that's also harmful to plant and animal life, you know, oil tankers, villages, all that kind of thing. We need to look after our forests as well, because greenery is oxygen giving, as we know. Forests are often cleared to rear livestock, for example, just so that we can eat meat. We don't need to eat as much meat as we do. We've only got 2 incisors, and you know, traditionally as hunter-gatherers, we would have been eating meat every night. Use natural materials, which I touched on, and live sustainably. Anything we take out of the earth, we need to be able to put back in, so the cycle of life can continue. So you can tell kids tips that they can do, walk and bike places, because then there's no petrol being used, and it's healthier too. Eat less meat, which is also healthier. Vegetables are really healthier. Waste less. We're living as a disposable society nowadays. You have disposable fashion, but you know, people I know even shockingly will rip out a lovely brand new fitted kitchen just because it's 5 years old and put a new one in, and that's really, really abhorrent, because you know, that's a lot of carbon footprint. We should value things. Things shouldn't be disposable. We should really use them as much as we can for as long as possible. So waste less, turn off lights, maybe take showers instead of baths. These are all things that you can tell your kids to do. Use less plastic, recycle and upcycle, and tell your grown-ups, because often the grown-ups are worse than the kids. And then I'm just going to end, because I have to end on a blue petery note. This is a really good activity that you can do with kids, which is just essentially making a bird feeder, and all you need is a juice carton essentially, and a bit of ribbon or cord which you screw in the lid, no glue needed, so it can hang. You decorate it, cut out a square on the front and back, and then stick a stick through, and then you can make an upcycled bird feeder. Obviously, if you're putting it somewhere where it's going to get wet, make sure that you paint it and don't put paper on it. But if you're hanging it on a balcony or somewhere covered, you can put paper on it. And it's really great for kids to get enthused about the planet while you're doing it. You're making something together. Kids love crafting. It's good for a present, so caring and is sharing. Sharing is caring. Give it to a mum or whatever. And it's a really good way to get sort of crafting and upcycling, to explain to kids about sort of why it's important to do these things. But anyway, I have run way over my allotted time, so I shall hand back to Shaddai, and I hope that some of what I've said has been helpful to you all, or interesting at least. Thank you.